relevant, interesting. Are you answering the question that everyone watching has, which is who is running the government at this point? It's obviously not Joe Biden. Yeah. You think Hillary Clinton?
It's not a leap of imagination to know that that's true when you look at the people who are in Joe Biden's administration. They are the people who were the right hands for the Obama administration, for President Obama, and for Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton said herself the other day, she said, "Oh yeah, I talk to the White House every day." So it is no shock or surprise who the influences are behind the policies that are coming out of this White House that many people say is the most radical and woke White House that our country has ever seen.
Oh, well, there's no question about it. So, but as this was happening to you, I mean, I'm sure you don't want to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Good for you. Tiresome. But on the other hand, it is a lot easier and much more pleasant to be loved than it is to be hated. I think it's just true. And so as you became like really hated by the leadership of the Democratic Party, and they weren't hiding it at all.
No.
Did you ever think like maybe it's just easier to kind of pretend bombing Syria is a good idea? Did you ever question your decision to say no?
No. I knew that would be true. I knew that there was certainly an easier path to take.
Yeah, you think?
It was kind of laid out for me when I first got there. But I never second-guessed my decisions about these different positions that I took. I never regretted them. Never, not to this day. And I never will, because I didn't go to Washington to be loved by the people who live and exist and thrive in that bubble.
Well, sure, I get it. And their love is not worth having. I
No.
totally agree. But their money's good.
Yeah.
And I think you're the only famous person I've ever met who flies coach. And you're certainly the only very, very well-known member of Congress and former presidential candidate I've ever met in my entire life who didn't cash in personally. And I know that is factually true.
Yeah.
So, like, do you ever think, like, maybe, I don't know, it's easier to fly first class. Maybe I should have just...
It's not worth it.
Okay. Good.
It's not worth it.
Do you think it's weird that we never talk about the money involved? Like, I just know that from living there.
Yeah.
And from knowing a lot of well-known people who've, become famous in politics.
Yeah.
And there's not one of them, literally not one on either side who's not in the top 1% for income, but you're not.
No.
Why doesn't anyone ever say that?
Yeah, because it is the assumed norm. It's not the exception. What they're doing is the norm. So why would they talk about it? There's nothing to talk about because they assume that every member of Congress, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the day you walk out, you get your payday.
What did you get when you walked out?
Nothing. Nothing. I had to come up with a plan of, all right. We got to figure out how we're going to pay the bills.
How much money had you amassed during your time in Congress?
Every financial advisor would probably be very disappointed because my husband and I were I had okay, we got a couple of months. We got a couple of months that we can make it through. We got to come up with a plan. Otherwise,
before you'd have to sell your weekend house, or
sure, the imaginary weekend house. Yeah, no.
Were you able to buy a big house when you were in Congress?
Of course, no. We bought a house. I don't think you ever came to our house there, but here's I'll give you a little hint where and we shared it with my sister and her husband. But we did buy a house in a neighborhood that was affordable in DC, and we found out the first week that we were there that we tried to order takeout from someone.
Oh, in DC. Oh, you lived in the hood. I knew
DC. that. and as soon as they're like, okay, put the order in and everything else, and as soon as I gave them the address, they're like, oh no, we don't deliver to that neighborhood. We won't cross that bridge. We won't cross the Anacostia Bridge to get to your house.
You lived on what we call the other side of the river.
Literally. Anyway, it's there was a question that a reporter asked me a couple of years, I forget, 2 or 3 years after I'd been in Congress. They're like, okay, you've been here a while now. Do you feel like you fit in? And it was a surprising question to me. And I said, no, I don't ever want to fit in here. This is not my home. I'm grateful to get out of here as quickly as possible, as soon as votes are done, as often as possible, get back to my community in Hawaii, or get out and visit other communities in the country, and remain very closely connected to the people who I am, I'm there to serve. And as you know, we've talked about this before. There's just there are far too many politicians from both parties who spend their time at social hours and happy hours with lobbyists than they do actually spend time at home.
Does anyone ever? Oh, well, that's certainly true. And they have sad, sad personal lives. Almost, not all, but most, as you know. I'm always amazed by the financial disclosures. And again, since this is the last question, but since no one else talks about it, I will. And you see these members of Congress who are, in some cases they're clever, maybe even smart. In some cases they're just pretty ordinary, actually. And they're so rich relative to the mean.
Oh, yeah.
Does anyone, and I have no idea how they made all that money. I have no clue at all how Nancy Pelosi is just so rich, or how her stock picks are like way better than Warren Buffett's. Like, how does that happen? Yeah. But does anyone ever talk about that internally, like on the Hill?
No, because most of them benefit from it. I love these like accounts on X and on Instagram that pop up now that are actually tracking. Yeah. And I don't know how they do it. I really don't know how they figure it out, but they are tracking what she's buying and what other members of Congress are buying.
Nancy Pelosi's stock tracker?
Oh, yeah. That's definitely one of them.
It's incredible.
But they're like, hey, everybody pay it. It is. It's incredible to see. And when you watch that, and I'm so glad for the transparency that they're providing to people in real time almost, but it's no wonder why she and others, Democrats and Republicans, who could very easily pass the legislation that says no member of Congress or the Senate or their spouse or their senior staff should be allowed to trade in stocks, period, full stop. It's such an obvious way to stop even the perception, if you want to claim like innocence or whatever. There should be no perception that our elected leaders are profiting off of the knowledge that they have as policymakers that directly impact industry and businesses. That's a no-brainer to me. I introduced legislation when I was in Congress to do that. Many people have since then. There's been a lot of talk and conversation. Why hasn't it gone anywhere? That's why, because they profit off it. So they don't, of course they don't want to talk about
that's just an easy one.
It is. And frankly, like, why do they need to be forced? When I'm not some kind of stock trader, but when I was like 23 and 24, I had like $5,000 in my savings account. I was like, okay, cool. Let me learn a little bit about stocks. I put some money in some stocks, and I don't remember how they did, but I knew immediately, like going into Congress, perception is reality.
Yes.
And so it doesn't matter like, well, I've had this stock for 15 years or whatever. It doesn't even matter what it is. I got rid of, I did not participate in anything related to stocks or stock trading or buying or selling or anything for the entire time that I was in Congress. And it's not some like, oh, look at me, I'm so great. It's just common sense that we have people in great positions of power. Why should they be forced to do something with the passage of a law? Why don't they just do the right thing and say, you know what? We get that even an innocent thing could be perceived as insider trading. We're just not going to go there.
Because it's too lucrative to give up.
And they know they can get away with it.
So it's interesting. So you have explained, and thank you, the history of Hawaii, which I think is directly relevant to the choices that you've made. Yeah. And as far as I know, everything is true. And so the party has changed a lot in just the brief time that you were a member of it. A lot, dramatically, unrecognizable. But also in the process of going through all these experiences and being attacked by people who said they were your allies, you've got to change.
Yeah.
I mean, I've changed dramatically in 20 years just through, we all do, if we're honest. So how have you changed? Like, what perceptions of yours are different from what they were 5 years ago?
It is that the last 5 years that it became more and more clear to me how many people, especially in the Democratic Party, in Washington specifically, how little they think of the Constitution. And, I think the last 5 years especially are pretty pivotal, because you look at what happened with COVID, for example, as a starting point of how people, both at the federal level, at the state level, county level, in a lot of places, when given just a little bit of power, man, they took advantage of that and continued to abuse that power in a way that just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. When they're like, oh, okay, well, for public safety, everybody's got to stay indoors, and you can't go to church, and you can't even worship, out like in Hawaii on the beach. You can't have like an outdoor service. But if you're going to go and do a Black Lives Matter march, that actually rises above any public health and safety concerns that we talked about. And so that's okay. The politically motivated decisions that were being made in the midst of what they were calling this, the greatest health epidemic of our time, I think exposed pretty deeply to a lot of people that it was really all just about power, and how little they were concerned about things like freedom and civil liberties and the ability for us to make our own choices for ourselves. And then it just continued to escalate more and more with the Biden-Harris administration, in how they were undermining the rule of law, continuing to this day, and how willing they were to both directly and indirectly censor, blacklist, and smear everyday Americans across the country if you happen to challenge them, whether it be on COVID or it be on things like it. And this was, I think this was the thing that caused Mitt Romney to call me a treasonous liar, was saying, hey, there are U.S. funded, DOD funded biolabs in Ukraine that should be secured because there's a war going on over there. And the last thing we or the world needs is anything going on in those biolabs being unleashed in a way that could pose a threat to people. That was seen as...
but I should just say, you weren't guessing.
No.
You got that, or it was confirmed in any case, in a public exchange in the Senate between Marco Rubio of Florida, the sitting Republican senator, and Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State, who volunteered it on camera.
Yes.
So...
And it was on the DOD website talking about their long history of funding these biolabs, not only in Ukraine, but in many other countries. Of course,
because
around the world,
outside U.S. law. Right. So they can, and it's bioweapons research, obviously. But you were just, I don't even think you said that. You just said basically what the Undersecretary of State said in the Senate.
Right.
And then you have a creature like Mitt Romney calling you a traitor to your country.
He did.
So what do you think of him? Like, what is that? Why would he be so committed to a lie that he'd be willing to try to destroy your character?
He is part of that neocon, neolib establishment in Washington that poses a direct threat to our republic, to our democracy, and to our freedom. And that really is at the heart of why I chose to leave the Democratic Party. Seeing people, and yep, got it, he's a Republican, but he took the same position as Hillary Clinton and many other Democrats who don't care about our country. That's what it comes down to.
I agree.
They don't care about our country. I challenged Mitt Romney. I sent him a legal letter challenging him on his accusation for the very reason that we talked about. As a uniformed officer serving in the United States Army, his accusation as a U.S. Senator is a crime punishable by death. So if you're going to make that accusation, as he did on what was then known as Twitter, you better freaking back it up.
Is it a little, if you take 3 steps back, it's like, obviously Mitt Romney is emotionally a child. He's very much a sub-genius. He's like not a genius. Let's just put it that way. And he's made hundreds of millions of dollars in our economy. Like, what does that tell you about our economy? Like, how could a guy like that get so unbelievably rich? Like, there's something systemically wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole, I think there's a huge, and I think this will be the topic of the next book that I'll write, is, as we talk about the military industrial complex,
Yes.
there is a corporate industrial complex
For sure.
that exists as well. I'm all about capitalism, but when you look at the monopolies of
that's not capitalism.
that's not capitalism at all. You look at how many small businesses are suffering in this country because of overregulation by government and because they can't afford to pay millions, tens of millions of dollars to have lobbyists going and scratching the back of politicians so that they can create the loopholes that allow their business to thrive at the cost of the mass majority of the small businesses in our country.
Exactly
and the elimination of competitiveness, true competition, which is what capitalism is all about, true competition in our country. And that's how, when you look at people like Mitt Romney and you see how they have done so well, that's the reason why.
He's just so disgraceful. It's hard to believe he's real, but he is. So how did he respond when you
He
said...
didn't. His silence was...
He didn't respond at all?
Did not respond at all. Not to my lawyer, and not on Twitter, and not in any way, shape, or form, which... It didn't surprise me.
It's so dishonorable.
It is. I am so grateful and really truly feel like it is a privilege to be able to serve our country in uniform. April makes 21 years for me. I'm grateful to serve as a battalion commander currently, where I have the opportunity to work with incredible Americans who come from all over the country and who deeply love our country. It's not a small sacrifice to make, both for those who are serving as active duty service members, as well as those who serve in the reserve component. There's a reason why we do it, and it stems from a deep love for our country. And to have a guy like that make such an accusation, it hits close to home, not only for me, but the real issue with that, and why I challenged him on it, is because when people like Mitt Romney make that kind of accusation, when people like Hillary Clinton call me a traitor and a Russian asset or a puppet of Putin, this is not about me. It's about the message that they're sending to every serviceman and woman in this country and every American, that if you dare to challenge us, we will come at you.
It's always
with all
the
we
least
have.
American people who make the claim that you're not American enough.
Yeah.
Do you ever think, so again, this is demonstrable if anyone who's made it to this point in the conversation can decide, do I agree or disagree with Tulsi Gabbard? That's fine. But I don't think any fair person could say you're in this for the money or the accolades, just the opposite. You're continuing to get deployed and you're not making any money doing that. You're doing it anyway. It's quite a time commitment. Do you ever think like maybe politics is not the business for me because I believe what I believe and I'm kind of never going to sell it out? Maybe you're not transactional enough for this. No, I'm serious.
I have never thought of quote unquote politics as a career at all, ever. And so the different times in my life where I have held public office, it's never been, well, this is what I'm going to do for the next few decades and then I'll retire. And it's why I have left at different times. I did not run for re-election when I was serving in the state house because I decided to volunteer and deploy to Iraq with my brothers and sisters in the Hawaii National Guard at the time. I did not run for Congress again in re-election in 2020 because I felt like I could, the climate of the House of Representatives had gotten to that point where I felt like I had maximized the impact that I could make there, and I could be of more influence at that time on the outside, kind of holding their feet to the fire and being able to share exactly what I am now with the American people, the truth about what's going on in Washington and the truth about these politicians who claim to care for you, but show through their actions that they don't, more and more brazenly. And this is really, you'd ask the question about what happened over the last 5 years, and
how has it changed
the change really, where there has been a change, it has come from a much deeper appreciation frankly, of our Constitution and the role that our leaders must have in truly upholding the Constitution. It's obviously something I've sworn oath to twice in my life, and I care very deeply for. To see how those in power were so brazenly and continue to so brazenly abuse their power and weaponize, our law enforcement, the national security state, all of these different tools that are at their disposal, increasingly pushing us towards a place where our country is being led by a tyrannical government.
Yes. The problem with the
is a very real